Alright, back on the Tahoe again. I'm going to show you this. This right here is the connector for the blower motor. And it actually goes into, this is the actual control unit here. And what I've had to do is, I actually went in and replaced, I'm going to have to replace the connector and everything. The blower motor. You can see inside there, I'll get the light over to it, and it just melted the whole interior of that. And that's the back part you see right here. It's the exact same thing, only this one was melted really bad, and of course this one's in pretty good shape. So nobody makes a replacement blower motor switch for this, and that's all that's really wrong with it. So you have to go to a wrecking yard and buy the whole unit. Luckily they're not horribly crazy overpriced, and then I've already cut the wires off right here. I've had to cut that whole connector off, and I put it somewhere, I don't have it, but it was melted as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take something similar to this, and I may just do, a lot of times what I'll do is take, see if I've got any right in here. Yeah, these are a little bigger, but I've got some others that are perfect. So these are just basically the interior of this butt connector here. This is actually a dual-sided red and blue, but something like this, what I'll do is I'll take this and I'll put this over the end of that, and I'll squeeze it down with a tool I've got, and then I'll use something like this. This is heat shrink. Now this heat shrink right here, this is a 2-to-1 heat shrink, and the heat shrink that I use has the glue inside there, so when it gets hot it smushes. Glue will come out the ends a little bit, and the reason you use that is because it keeps corrosion from building up inside there. Some guys will use like these butt connectors. Now this one here is actually these are a heat shrink type butt connector, but they don't have any glue in them. But there's that, and then there's also these other ones. You probably see these. This is the larger yellow one. I don't use these very much. About the only thing I use these for is I will cut this outer shield off, and I'll use the guts of it right there, and then use a heat shrink. And then of course these are tiny. These used to be able to buy these at Radio Shack, but they're available through one of my distributors. And here's another one that's this is a heat shrink end on it right here, as you can see. And this is just my little box of goodies that I have. I've got some good battery terminal ends that I've used. I've got some, these are some even larger. These are 1 gauge. Those take battery cable on each end. I usually will knock a little solder on the inside of those. Here's an even bigger one. That's 0 gauge. And then these are good for like repairing alternator wiring that gets hot and burns up. That's a 4 gauge 3/8. I think the ones on the alternators most of the time are about an 8 gauge, which you can use. I wouldn't use that, but there's another one in here that I was going to show you. That's an even bigger one there. That's good for putting 2 batteries together, like if you have a diesel truck or a big semi or something. Yeah, I can't seem to find the one I was going to show you. Oh, here it is. These are some you can use too. They're a pretty good size. I don't know why they're a red connection, because they seem like that's the red connectors that you use are these little tiny things right here. But these ones that have nothing on them, these are really excellent for using this heat shrink tubing around. I've got tons of that heat shrink tubing, different sizes. There's another one that you can use for like an alternator wire, but it's pretty thin, so you got to be careful with the thinness. You don't want it too thin. That one already messed up on, looks like. Anyway, I'll do some of this and I'll get back with you. Alright, so here I wanted to show you these are several of the heat shrinks that I use. This big fat one you can use on batteries. These all come in, I can get them into 5-foot lengths, 5-foot lengths. This is a 3-to-1, that's a 3-to-1, and these are all 2-to-1 with the glue or epoxy that squeezes out whenever you get them hot. And that's typically the way I'll use those. Now what I do, I use these, so I'll have to strip some of this back. I'll get the scissors. You know, this tape, it gets nasty. It's all real sticky. So anyway, what I do with these, I'll use this, I think I've got this one at maybe Home Depot or one of those, but you go just so far and to clamp it down over this, and I think it comes with a little bit of practice and experience, and they just come right out. You just stick them in there and you just squeeze them a little bit, and it does have a set screw to move that up and down, but I don't typically use that all that much. I think it's just a matter of feel, but I'm only leaving like 1/4 of an inch, and I squeeze just a little and pull it right off of there, just like this. And of course the vehicle will need to be vacuumed, so it still needs to be vacuumed. Some of this is landing in the cup holder down below here, and you'll see my video on when I cleaned this thing out real good. It was really nasty. Well, I've still got a little bit more vacuuming to do because of some of the garbage that was under the seat. Alright, so here's one of the little pieces of the heat shrink, and I put it over here first, and this is just a regular butt connector, and then I'll use this end on it, and you can see I'm going to put a little dimple in it right there, and that's going to hold that in place. Now I've got the corresponding yellow wire here, and this will go to the end of that. Squeeze it down, make sure that it doesn't slip, and then we'll put this over the end there. And so you can see how far it is in there. I just make it just a little bit over the edge so you know that you've got it square in the middle. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take your little torch, and you're just going to want to warm that up a little bit. And then that should be good to go. Now this is still pretty hot right here, so you don't want to touch that. But that's how we're going to do all the rest of these corresponding wires to fix that. And then, like I say, once I get done with that, that plugs right into the back here. And I'll discuss with you in a little while how this happens. How this thing becomes melted in there. You can see the back of that's really in bad shape, and then the inside of that's where all the little, when you turn the dial, all the little copper connectors. They just go onto each one of these for high, medium, low, whichever speed you're on. And then I'll discuss with you why this happens here in just a little bit. Alright, so there's your controller, and you can see what I've done here is I've got all these wires. Now I can show you, this one's real easy to see. Now you could see the glue has kind of started coming out of that heat shrink right there, and that's what you want. There are some cheaper heat shrinks out on the market, and I don't necessarily recommend them, but that's what I would recommend right here is these little 2-to-1, or even you can put like these thicker walled, which that's basically a 3-to-1. And I can show you how this works by taking a little bit of that, and I've got plenty of this, but I'll show you how this 3-to-1 works. You take your torch, you can use a heat gun, whatever works for you, and you just work that around. The 3-to-1's a little thicker, so it takes a little bit more to get it started, but what it does is it shrinks that around there and it gets the glue Look at the size of the hole now. From that to that. Now it's still quite hot, of course. You don't want to touch it, but you know it's pretty rock solid here, but it's real flimsy right there. So that's what that does. Is, you know, and you can see how it's worked around there. Now also I've used this in a pinch for like a vacuum line. You could make a little bit more of that and use a vacuum line. If you have one that's cracked and you just can't seem to find one, you can put this around there and just warm that up a little bit, and that'll help too. And I'm gonna show you this. So with the key in the on position, and that comes on, and that's working good now. One thing I was going to tell you about is what causes this kind of a meltdown on these electrical systems. This piece and looking at the back of it right here where it's really melted and blistered, and then the inside of it is just nasty. Well, I'm going to give you an analogy to kind of help offset how this works. And basically what it is the blower motor is the fault. But here's the trick. The blower motor doesn't blow the fuse. I mean, once in a while it will, but what I find is the analogy I'm going to use is the frog in water. Frog in boiling water. If you boil water and you throw a live frog, so they say, I don't know if this is true, but they say if you throw a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out right away. But if you put the frog in water and you slowly heat the temperature a little at a time, eventually the frog will die and it'll boil. And the reason I use that analogy is the same thing with the heater system in this particular vehicle and many others like it. What happens is the blower motor, let's say, will take about 10 amps when it's new, and it's probably got a 20 amp fuse, and every time you turn a blower motor on, which is a good example, a blower motor takes more amperage to start it than it does to keep it going. So it may take 12 amps to start it, or maybe even up to 15 when it's cold out, and then when it's warmed up somewhat, it'll come back down to 10. So that said, what can happen is the blower motor over time, they get old, they get a little weak, but they still tend to draw more energy than they should. And now this is just the motor. This is not anything else, and I'll get to that in a second too. But the motor itself will draw a little bit more power each time, and I've seen them actually draw up to 20 amps when they first start. When it's, well, let's see, this morning it was 9 below 0 Fahrenheit here in Colorado, so it was pretty cold. So you turn the motor on, and a lot of times people will leave the blower motor in high when they leave for the night, and then come back in the morning and it's already on full blast. And of course they turn it down, but you know, that in itself could actually cause the problem. What happens is the blower motor takes so much electrical power that inside here there's enough of a resistance in these terminals, it'll get them a little bit warm. And over time, it'll keep building that up, and it'll keep getting it. It won't blow the fuse, but it'll keep this thing getting hot, and eventually, it'll start to melt the inside of it. Yet it will not blow the fuse. Now, let's say this thing shorts out internally, or something happens in here. Yeah, it'll pop. It blows the fuse, and that's basically the water being thrown in boiling water and jumping right back out. It'll pop the fuse, but over time it slowly cooks these electrical components. There's been many cars out there with recalls on this very item right here. There's been some Fords that I've seen where they had connectors on the blower motor connector itself, and also on the heater control connector was melted on the back right inside here. Those, you can almost see it. I'd have to get a little bit brighter light, but I'm holding the camera and showing you this at the same time. So anyway, that's kind of the way these things work. And it's not just that, there's various other components in a vehicle that can do the same thing. Cooling fans are one, because they take a lot of energy. Anything that can take higher amounts of electrical power, you know, that, and I think electric smog pumps are that way. There's some vehicles that have a like a compressor to air up the airbags in the suspension. Those compressors, they get to doing that as well. Most of the time they just stop working, but eventually what they do is they'll melt the connectors. I've seen them actually melt wiring under the dash before. Various things like that. I've seen it burn fuse box up, melt the fuse box, things like that. So it's not just a cut and dry blown fuse and you're done. This can actually destroy vehicles. It'll destroy wiring, things like that. So if you have problems like that and you're not real sure about it, or you smell something funny once in a while with the heater on, have it checked out so it's not, you know, causing these issues here, because that easily could have turned into a fire hazard. And then the next thing is, we're talking blower motor, so now we can talk about the squirrel cage. Squirrel cages, especially this time of year, you'll find mice inside the heating system. They crawl in there. I've spent countless hours looking to find out where mice have come from, how they try to get into vehicles. I've put screen door over air intakes, things like that, to keep from getting nests built up in air boxes and stuff, because they'll fill it full of dog food and all kinds of other stuff. But the blower motor themselves, I've seen them in the blower cage, the squirrel cage as they call it, and I don't have one to show you. I wish I could show you one, but what they'll do is they'll build a nest in there, and that thing will vibrate, and it'll just it'll conk out the motor. Sometimes it'll burn the wiring up. Sometimes it'll just simply blow the fuse. But one time I saw this happen before, and all it was is there was a strip of paper inside the squirrel cage, and it threw enough resistance off that it caused the motor itself to not blow consistently. And I think it actually it wasn't out of balance from what I could tell. It was just a little strip of paper. Looked like somebody tore a strip of paper off of a business card, and it got sucked into the air intake in the blower motor system, and that's all it was. I took that thing out of there, and it'd been in there for a while, and it stopped melting the wiring. You could smell it. It wasn't completely melted like this switch, but that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about that I've seen, is that it'll melt the electrical wiring pretty good, and that's a pretty good meltdown right there. You can see this back side of this right here, and sorry about my fingernails, I chew them up pretty good, but this back side here where it's all blistered, yeah, it's a goner. I mean, it was melted long ago, and it never blew the fuse. So anyway, just thought I'd give you that quick tip. And I guess that's it for now. We'll talk to you later. We'll keep on the Tahoe and try to get her going and get everything else back together.